Good morning. I'm very pleased to be able to speak with you this morning. It is the middle of October, and you'll be seeing this podcast somewhere around, I suppose, early December, but it is still a fall day back here on Long Island, and I am pleased to be able to work with my guests to make this all happen, make a great podcast all happen. My name is Dr. Richard Bernardo. I'm the editor-in-chief of Scope, Journal for Leadership and Instruction. And the Journal for Leadership and Instruction is a 22-year-old journal that's been promoting good and exemplary scholarly research about matters that, for the most part, pertain to school systems and school leadership. However, many of the things we speak about extend beyond that, as this particular podcast will certainly do. And I guess about 6 months ago, we decided to not only continue to, obviously, to publish authors who offer us things to think about, as we have with Dr. John Coverdale in a moment, but we also thought that perhaps entering the 21st century, it would be a good idea to begin to also offer podcasts up to viewers for one of a couple of reasons. One of them being it might be an incentive for you to go back to get the journal, to read that journal more carefully, and especially in this case, to read Dr. Coverdale's article. And also, as importantly, to share and exchange the kinds of premises and ideas that the journal chooses to consider and to offer up for people to marinate in, to use one of my favorite words. So with that, I'm going to introduce Dr. John Coverdale. I know Dr. Coverdale slightly, but I do know him. I did sit on his doctoral committee a long time back, and where he had an exemplary dissertation, as a matter of fact. And in this case, he has an article that's entitled, I never remember the name of the title, forgive me, Striving for an Inclusive Workplace.
Yes.
But it goes much deeper than, I don't want to say but as if it's a negative, but, and it also takes us into conversations and considerations that will resonate with many of you, both when you read the article and when you watch all of this podcast. A point I wanted to make before I forget, I was just reading a book, and I was just sharing with John, and it was a phrase. I'm only going to give you a piece of the phrase. The book is called Abundance, and the piece I was reading about was about ideas. And the phrase I'm using with you is a phrase I think is powerful and will resonate with the kind of premises that John's going to share with us in a moment. And here it is: ideas meet and mate and mutate. Being a teacher for a long time, I just counted to 6, so you would think that really I get a chance to reflect on that premise. And the ideas that Dr. Coverdale will be offering up to us in a moment, I hope will meet and mate and mutate in a good way to create a tipping point of conversations. And I'm talking too long. I'm going to let Dr. Coverdale introduce himself, and then he's going to speak about the article he authored for the journal that will be coming out in the middle of November. And I'm talking too much. Dr. Coverdale.
Thank you, Dr.
Dr. Coverdale, go.
It's so nice to see you again and interact with you. I have great fondness for my time at Dowling and your assistance during the dissertation process, and your colleague or former colleague, Dr. Robert Manley, is just been a personal and professional all-star in my life. So
yes, with me too. And I'm playing golf with him tomorrow. So,
but my name is John Coverdale. I am a human resource management consultant, founder and owner of the Center for Workplace Solutions, which is a boutique consulting firm that works to provide a range of organizational support for municipalities, school districts, and small businesses, particularly in the area of human resource management, organizational behavior. I'm also an employment mediator and workplace investigator and college professor at Stony Brook University.
Okay, very impressive background, and we know he has a great influence in many areas, obviously. And Dr. Coverdale authored what we call a From the Field article to the Journal of Leadership and Instruction, which we eagerly endorse it for publication. Tell us about that article and what you think the basic issues are connected with that, please.
Well, the article really stems from my ongoing experience with many organizations, particularly in response to the protests, the social and political protests that emanated from the George Floyd incident. And although this is a problem, an issue that predates the George Floyd incident or any other incident, you know, that particular incident has, I think, really fostered critical conversations in organizations about hiring practices, about social inequities, about perceptions of fairness in employment and opportunity in employment that are really tied to our country's history. So, and in school districts, among my school district clients, you know, there are people who have really started to have fascinating conversations around diversity and equity and inclusion. And in some cases, those conversations have resulted in changed practices, heightened awareness, different hiring practices. And in other cases, organizations, even though well-intended, have struggled to achieve some level of progress, measurable progress on the topic. So this is an article that really is born from my observations with regard to where people are in the DEI journey and what can be done to help not only foster progress, but also to have the results of that progress anchor in organizations. So how do you create more inclusive work environments is really what we have in mind as an end result. Yes, diversity is important, and you know this article speaks to how to address some of the inequities in diversity, but we also focus a little bit on recruitment. But you know, with all due respect, those are the easier parts, you know, because you have to also focus on creating inclusive environments. And all the data is indicating that employees across a wide array of diverse mindsets want that from their employer now. So it's a critical time for this issue. It really is.
It certainly is, and I'm actually encouraged that you said that more organizations and employers are sharing with you that they want this to happen. That actually encourages me. I have to say that.
The data is very powerful. It's and I wish the initiatives were more leadership driven. And I hope that they in the future will become more leadership driven than many of them have been to date, because that's where you get sort of a cascading of the initiative throughout organizations. You know, employee driven initiatives don't seem to have the same longevity. They come and go with other employee initiatives. They come and go as the employee demographic changes, but leadership is leadership, as they say. So I think we'll see that happen. I think it is happening in many instances, not just in business, but also in municipalities, and it certainly is happening in school districts.
Yeah, part of me wishes that you were wrong about the employee ability to sustain that kind of interest, but it makes sense what you're saying. The leadership, and I don't like the word top down, the phrase top down all that much, but I guess has to come from the top to take the charge on having these things happen.
Right.
In the end, a good leader, I'm talking to myself as much as I'm talking to you on this count. I was going to say this later, but I will say it now. The word you used earlier on, among many great phrases, is change. And change is a kind of noun verb that is used so often that I think we lose sight of what either of those two kinds of change words imply. Mm-hmm. And it's troublesome to me that leaders, whether they're within school systems or in other kinds of organizations, don't know how to make the changes come from the bottom up, or how to nurture coming from the bottom up. And so we're still working from a hierarchical system, which is also subject often to, I guess, to the vagaries of what society says or doesn't say. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And I would add that change as an organizational initiative um, doesn't have a high success rate. So, and I don't mean just with DEI, I mean any change initiative. You're talking about human behavior here. And, you know, we all probably would be a little more comfortable staying where we are on any given issue than being forced to change. So I think in particular with an issue or a topic that's as sensitive as diversity and equity and inclusion, you also have to understand that it's potentially very significantly impacted because it's going to be seen as a change initiative. So you're facing a high level of resistance, and
Without a
change
doubt.
creates tension. Tension creates conflict. You know what the end result is. So you have to go into that with this in mind, and it's why it's more important, as I mentioned, at the leadership level, that that this anchor, because it's true for all organizations. Very little occurs that isn't a leadership initiative.
Isn't that the case? Peter Senge wrote The Fifth Discipline. I'm sure you're familiar with the book and several books
On
after
my bookshelf still.
I know. Well, actually, the better book is, I think, Schools That Change. Schools That Learn, excuse me.
Schools That Learn, yeah.
You know that book? That book is
Yes.
a terrific example of how his ideas translate to school systems as such. But one of his phrases, I'm pretty sure it's his phrase, is when you try to change the system fights back.
Right.
And when that happens, you just can't snap a finger or use a Walt Disney magic wand to suddenly have that transformation begin.
Mhm.
Now, I have a phrase that I think applies to what you're talking about as well, is that we're talking about transformation, and transformation equals a new way to realize. And so until folks realize differently, the change prospect is dim until they begin to, and I use this phrase way too often, drink the Kool-Aid. And someone pointed out to me yesterday that, Dr. B, when people drink the Kool-Aid, they died.
Right.
So I have to come up with a better phrase than that, but I think you get the idea.
Yeah, the analogy is clear, though. Yes.
You're talking about, in this case, asking leaders, not asking, observing that leaders more and more they're realizing differently for whatever reasons. And they're transforming on their own. And now they need to vibrate that change back out across an organization and across the communities or the clients whom they serve.
Mhm.
So, that makes it a complex thing. And I wonder sometimes, and I don't know if you feel like you can comment to this, whether leaders have the competencies to really encourage a true sustained change initiative. In your case, in talking about the diversity and recruitment issues that you're alluding to in the article.
I believe it's less of an issue of competencies than it is an issue of awareness.
Okay.
And I understand that to some degree, a lack of awareness could be considered a competency or something that needs to be developed into a competency. But I think the key for leaders today is enhanced understanding of not only the environment in which you work, and I don't mean the organization, I mean our larger
Yes.
external environment, the social and demographic environment, but understanding that the environment, and I think it's safe to say more than any recent point in our history, is having an impact on the internal organization. More and more people, according to the data, are expressing concerns about what their workplace environment looks like, seeking more positive organizational culture. it clearly is connected to retention rates.
Yes.
It clearly is connected to how attractive an organization is seen to a prospective employee. So if you consider that and connect it to the demographic changes that have unquestionably taken place at a rate or pace that does create some cause for concern for some people, particularly people that are more change resistant. The key for leaders today is to understand that moment, not only the moment, but how it's going to impact the employee mindset, which shapes and influences organizational culture. I mean, and if there's a takeaway, if there were only one takeaway, and I think there are many, but if there are only one takeaway for the last, I would say, 3 to 5 years for leaders, understanding the shift in the demographic mindset and its impact on employment would be at or near the top, or should be at or near the top of the list. There's a lot of noise and other things that you could probably overlook, but I don't think you can overlook that one.
No, I call that futuring. I'm smiling because you haven't heard that word from me before, but it's my favorite word for anyone who knows me for more than 10 minutes. Because recognizing, what the ripple effects are of that disposition change you're talking about requires some deep thinking. It's not something you just snap your fingers at and just say, we'll see where the ripples go, because sometimes ripples will go to corners of the pond that don't need to have that happen, or they might be more deleterious than not. So if we're talking about really recognizing how impacts and futuring creates what I call preferred futures rather than probable ones, again, it calls for very deft leadership, which is some of the premises that you raised in the article. Would you like to just point out some of the highlights of that, John?
Oh, you're absolutely correct, because we summarize this article, we're talking about building the future workforce.
Amen.
I mean, and a future workforce that aligns more closely with the emerging demographic, and aligns more closely with the employee mindset and the data that says that employees are looking for organizations. According to the Gallup organization, the Gallup survey, it said among the top 6 things that employees want, it was number 6 out of 6, but still more diverse and fair-minded organizations is number 6.
Okay, so now if we brought it back to the education forum for a bit, do you have a feel for how well this is translating to I don't want to say suburban, let's say education in general, rather than trying to decide different regions as such?
The statistics are not where I would like to see them yet. However, I don't have an ideal number in mind, and that's not where we're coming from when we do the sort of work that I've done in this article, or when we talk about recruitment efforts and so forth. It is clear that Long Island is largely through BOCES in both Nassau and Suffolk counties are hyper-focused on this issue. In terms of recruitment, I've worked with agencies, both these agencies in Nassau and Suffolk, to analyze their recruitment practices. And I look at recruitment as part of this system because there's a problem that has to be resolved. Something isn't happening the way it's supposed to happen. You're not achieving the results that you desire, or that you should be focused on, considering the demographic changes. So we are working to expand the recruitment net and focusing on getting qualified, diverse candidates to enter into the pipeline. But we can't wait for them to enter into the pipeline. We may have to go and reach out to them. So that's why we're focusing on expanding the recruitment net. I also firmly believe that once individuals apply for positions, that none of the interview committees, that's a very popular practice, particularly in education, should be able to interview a candidate without having gone through some sort of conversation. And you could do a lot in a 30-minute lunch and learn, that focuses on debiasing the process, the interview process. Because if you're not willing to do that, you are exposed to sort of the old methodology with regard to the hiring committee. Do they align with the district's practices, or are they just, trying to continue, perhaps unconsciously, the old practices of in-group preferences? So with that in mind, and we talk about targeted recruitment, and I want to emphasize the targeted recruitment is not hiring people who are not qualified or who are less than qualified. Targeted recruitment is being more aggressive in finding qualified, diverse educators.
Wow. No, I mean, I have too many questions rattling around in my bald head. I'm trying to sift through which one I want to ask next. I'm thinking of Priscilla Wolstead. Forgive me for being nerdy for a minute. Priscilla Wolstead created a model of about how groups should work within school systems. She identified, it was called the high involvement model, and she identified, she and her colleagues, 6 factors, if I remember correctly, that have to be present in any group for that group to be effective. Now, I'm only going to mention 2 for the moment. In fact, the 2 most powerful variables were power and knowledge, in that order. And the power piece was about boundaries, where sometimes school committees, as we know, any kind of school committee, but in your case, you're talking about interview committees. I love that point. And I don't think I've ever thought of it, to be quite honest. I'm embarrassed to say. But the power point is about boundaries, where a group like an interview committee knows where it can go and where it cannot go. Well, who holds the magic, the chalice, whatever word metaphor works, to make the final decision in hiring practices. By law, it belongs with the board and the superintendent. But superintendents, one would hope, would charge an interview committee with the authority to either absolutely recommend or at least recommend within, let's say, a number of different candidates. That's not the one I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about was the second variable, which was what you just mentioned in a different way about, I forget the exact term you used. Was it called pre-bias training? Something?
Unconscious bias?
Well, yeah, I mentioned that before they begin an interview process, they might need to get some knowledge about recognizing biases and making choices. Have you done things like that? That's very intriguing to me.
I have, and I think it's important also to note that, when we talk about unconscious bias, it doesn't necessarily have to extend to race or ethnicity. It includes your preference for maybe people that went to Ivy League colleges, or preference for people who came out of the military, or preference for athletes. And so, you look at the interview process as intake. And, so how do you debias that process? And when you add race and ethnicity, and in some cases, even gender, we see a bias that can be very prevalent. Keep in mind that team that's functioning, you mentioned the word power. So the most powerful person on that team probably is the gatekeeper. And they have the right to say, well, this person isn't going to be recommended to the superintendent. And in the past, in too many instances, they've said, well, they're just not a good fit. I don't think he or she would be a good fit. And that good fit assessment has a more harsh impact for people based on race and ethnicity and gender. But it can also impact any of the other biases that we're not aware of. And that's, you also have to remember that people who are on any interview committee, one, have been employed presumably for some period of time, right? We can't have people on an interview committee if they're not employees. So although you have parents and so forth, but everybody's part of that school culture for some period of time. They see what the organization has looked like. They see what the staffing model has been. And I believe that even unconsciously, it's very difficult to ignore that. I mean, for example, I have a clients, a school in particular, a school district that in one elementary school, I think had 60 teachers and 58 of them were women.
Yeah,
So,
many schools
I
like
mean,
that.
so when you, and I understand the dynamics, I'm the son of educators. I'm a former school board president. I did work for NYSET, the State Teachers Union, for 20 years. I understand the demographic dynamic differentiation between a high school and a middle school, or junior high school and elementary school in terms of staffing. The elementary schools do tend to be more attractive to female candidates than they are for male candidates. And that's just part of the system. And that's real. That doesn't mean anyone's been discriminated, but 58-2, you really have to take a look at why that has occurred, and also been able to, and been maintained over hiring cycle after hiring cycle after hiring cycle. So who's on the interview committee?
Yeah.
Women. And who feels most comfortable in their environment? Right. And why would you want to change that to an environment where you maybe experienced some discomfort, or there was change? But I mean, the larger issue is the great percentage, and I'm guessing it's got to be 98 or 99% of the students that go through that elementary school never have a male teacher.
That's right.
Never see a male teacher. So is that good? I don't know that it's necessarily harmful, but I don't know that it's good either. And that's what we're talking about here.
Without a doubt. I'm just thinking, I'm not sure if this is relevant to what you're saying, but I just feel like I want to share this anecdote, if you don't mind. I was doing site visits as, I think I was still over at Dowling, John, and I was doing no, it was at St. John's. And I was doing a site visit in a district, largely minority, almost totally minority students, African-American and Latino kids. It was the day after, and I'm not being political here, okay? It's gonna sound like I am, but I'm not. It was the day after Obama was reelected. So it was 2012. So I went into this second grade class. It was about, I always count the students. It was 27 students in the class, big class. 25 were minority students. The teacher wheels out a video card and puts up a cable news network that's got Obama, President Obama's on there, accepting his victory or something like that. And I am pretty articulate about many things, but I don't have the command of the English language to tell you about the power of the squeal of 27 kids of joy when they saw the picture, they saw Obama as the president. Knocked me off my chair. It was palpable. And to come back to your point about whether all male teachers or all female teachers, for that matter, or what their racial ethnic backgrounds may be, to overlook that, not to consider that as a factor in working with a changing demographic, with a future, an emerging future that is here, like it or not, that has to be factored into making schools effective for all students. It just knocked me down. What's the message behind your music in the end of the article that you offered us? Well, you can respond to my Obama anecdote. I love that anecdote. I'm smiling every time I think about it. Either one, respond to either one that you like.
Well, the Obama story is very touching because it also aligns with the data that speaks to the power of symbolism for young people and the importance that at some point in their development, they see people in positions of authority that look like them. And that's part of the reason why, we have had some difficulty recruiting minorities to enter the field of education. Is because statistically, we go through our K through 12 journeys and we don't see very many people, and some people don't see anyone that looks like them, depending on where they went to school, or and at some point that influences your decision to enter a profession or a line of work, because you didn't have a role model or somebody that you could identify with. Is that an absolute truth? Probably not, but it's a significant enough truth, I think, to be determinative in terms of how we look at planting the seeds for people to come into this field so that we can ultimately recruit them as dedicated educators who want to then reach out to their own students and play. Teachers, to me, are role models. Again, I'm the son of educators. I think it's one of the most important jobs on the planet. And I didn't have to look, but so far, I mean, my breakfast table, really, to see two people that I thought were significant role models for me. But they also happen to be educators. So I saw that. And while I'm not an educator, I consider myself to be more of a trainer and facilitator than I do an educator. I am 25 or so years into a successful career as an adjunct college professor. And clearly that's part of the education process. And I have students who come up to me and said, I'm an undergrad. I never had a minority instructor.
Very true. Very true.
So, and the other issue here is for majority students, I think it's important for everyone to have an opportunity to see diverse people in positions of authority. I mean, part of what causes me, I'll use the Socrates, quote, tension of the mind. And in my work as an HR consultant, particularly when I'm doing some workplace investigations and so forth that are centered on discrimination, whether it's sexual discrimination, race, religion, in particular, I often ask myself as I'm doing the intake and interviewing people, I mean, how did we get to this point?
Yeah.
And I happen to think that one of the factors that affirms the mindset of superiority in some people is because, and it's particularly true on Long Island, your K through 12 journey was in many cases completely devoid of anyone who didn't look like you.
That's exactly true.
So unless you were going into the military after high school, which tends to be a little more diverse, or going to college, and some of which are more diverse than others, that's a problem. For somebody going from high school to work, and you now are seeing, probably for the first time, in many cases, you have a supervisor or superior that doesn't look like you. And again, it's not an absolute problem, but think about the mindset of somebody that's never had that experience. Particularly on Long Island, where this is one of the most, I'm a native Long Islander, and of all the places I've ever been, I don't know that I see myself living anywhere else. But we are very clearly divided socioeconomically on Long Island, and our school districts are staffed in that model. At least from the historical standpoint, our school districts have been staffed like that, and our neighborhoods are populated in that way. Now, you may say, as somebody once said to me, I disagree with you, because when I go to the mall, I see this person, I see that person, I see people that are different to me. And I emphasize the mall. Do they live next door to you? Are they on sports teams with your kids? Did you invite them over for, Sunday dinner? So in our neighborhoods, we tend not to see diversity.
Absolutely
And
sure.
schools are staffed around a model that reflects how the neighborhoods are comprised. That's how schools, I don't mean right now, I mean historically, that was the staffing model.
All the more reason that the kind of recommendations and the points that you raise in this article serve as overview guidelines for people to really sink into. The article of itself is very well written, has great whole variety of pieces. There's a book in here someplace, Dr. C. I'm totally serious about that. But in the end, at least perhaps it gives us a chance to continue this conversation, maybe in future podcasts between the two of us, and maybe some other folks might be on the panel, or through other means. I'm going to put up. I wanted to say that, as I said earlier, that purpose of this podcast is to exchange thinking, and to mate and mutate that thinking and those ideas into actions, hopefully that move towards the kinds of things that Dr. Coverdale advocates so eloquently. So in order for these things to really take root, we need people to continue the conversation. When you go on this link, you'll see my email address. And I was asking Dr. Coverdale before we got on if I could share questions to him, and he said, I think he says yes.
Absolutely, yes.
So what I will do, I'll filter them for him, not to have any old question, no offense, roll over to him, but I'll continue to share this kind of conversation among the three of us, and we'll see where that goes. We'll see whether we can get some kind of critical mass built to promote and further exchange the kinds of implications of the things that we spoke about, the implications for change. And changes are where we're using too many places in school systems, especially after the COVID crisis. Mm-hmm. But we're talking about change in terms of making our school systems whole with a W. And I'm very appreciative, Dr. Coverdale, of what you've offered today. Is anything you'd like to offer to close off our conversation? Otherwise, I'll keep you here all day.
I would hope that as people read the article, they see it as a pathway to collaborative conversations, leadership conversations, which objectively look at the interviews and selection process, taking a look at the staffing models, taking a look at how we recruit, taking a look at which is just as important, if not more important, how ready is our environment for inclusivity? And chances are statistically that it's not as ready as the leaders think it is. So, this article provides a couple of, I think, good ideas for leadership conversations at the district level, and with the building level administrators, but also to talk to some people that have been around working in the district for quite some time. Talk to some people who are in their first year, at the end of their first year, just starting their second year, because that data is critically important to the process. How inclusive do those individuals think the organization is? Talk to us about your first year, your second year, your third year. What did you experience? Were there any interactions with the community that caused you discomfort? How can we more effectively recruit, and meet the challenge of recruiting, qualified, diverse educators, diversity broadly defined, or diversity that just intersects, to some degree we've talked about today, with race and ethnicity. Mm-hmm. And from that, I think there's great opportunity for people just to have there's a need to have these conversations in organizations. Progressive leaders in organizations of all kinds are having just these conversations today, because this is a change. How ready are we as an organization? What about my own biases as a leader? What do I need to work on? where am I in terms of an emotional intelligence analysis or assessment. I share in the article one of my experiences, at Stony Brook with leaders from Korea, and I
Yes, you
initially
do.
I didn't want to accept the assignment, and it was a very prestigious assignment. It's an assignment that typically wouldn't even go to an adjunct. That would be a tenured faculty, golden nugget. And the dean offered it to me, and I said no initially. When I took the assignment, I just decided to work through that perceived language barrier, and it was more than perceived. There was a clear language barrier, but you'd be amazed by what you can accomplish if you get together in a room with people and you work through those barriers, and you determine that you're going to meet each other at some point. You're going to move out of your corner, you're going to move out of your, you're going to meet each other at some point. It doesn't have to be neatly in the middle, but you used the word at the start of this, change. I changed as a result of that experience. I'm disappointed in myself that I said no initially because of my concerns of the language barrier, but that's the human reaction. That's the tension that we all experience when we're dealing with something with which we're not familiar or we're not comfortable.
And you use the word, another word I like, and that's the word experience. Thankfully you did accept the assignment, and the experience transformed you. And then you have a new way to realize as a result of having been through the experience. And it occurs to me that leaders of any organization, not just school systems, have to really think about what kinds of experiences they're working through. And with that, I'll close off this conversation, but with my sincere thanks, first of all, having a chance to speak to you again, and hopefully to be able to speak to you more often, but also for the kinds of things you scraped away at today that need to be really factored into the deeper conversations of wholesale with a W, systemic changes, dispositional changes, as well as practices. And for that, I thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Well, I thank you, Dr. Bernardo. It's been a thrill to see you again and to speak with you again, but also I appreciate your focus or spotlighting this issue, and I'm looking forward to continued conversations with you and with Scope.
Me too. Take care.